And the actor goes to Michael Keaton. Keaton, Dopesick.
Actor Michael Keaton has won several awards, including his first Emmy for his performance in the Hulu series Dopesick. The Batman actor portrays a hardworking doctor in a small mining town who became addicted to the pain pills that he prescribed. Today on Grieving Out Loud, we have an exciting interview with the man who was the real-life inspiration behind Keaton's compelling character.
Basically, everything you see from the end of episode 3 until the end of episode 7 happened in my life. So yeah, it's kind of weird to see it on TV. He won an Emmy for it, and I tell people all the time, as my running joke is, that he was a hack before he got my role, and I shot him to start him. Obviously, Batman wasn't anything.
All jokes aside, Dr. Loyd's story is truly worth an Emmy Award-winning series. He overcame abuse, wrestled with addiction, and faced heartbreaking losses, all while trying to maintain his composure as a dedicated physician and professor.
I was teaching full-time, and all 4 of those years, I was voted the most outstanding instructor in the students' internal medicine rotations. And, 6 weeks before I went to treatment, back in 2004, I was at the graduation ceremony, and the students that honored me as being the mentor of the year for their entire med school, for all 4 years, and I was using the whole time. And I actually used, in their ceremony, I went to the bathroom and used 160 milligrams of OxyContin during the ceremony.
But Loyd's story isn't just about challenges. It's a testament to resilience, strength, and the courage to face the darkest corners of life, despite public opinion. I hope you find this conversation as inspiring and informative as I have. I'm Angela Kennecke, and you're listening to Grieving Out Loud. Well, Dr. Loyd, it's a pleasure to see you again after bumping into you in Washington, D.C. at some of these rallies that we were attending. It was during a tropical storm. That's probably one of the things I remember most about it.
Yeah, it was. And thanks for having me. But, seeing you carrying the picture of Emily that day with the, wind blowing rain sideways, which it was, I just couldn't wait to get to talk to you. I had no idea what you did, but, seeing your daughter, and because that's a picture I see way too often.
Oh, I know. I'm not alone. And I just am trying to do everything I can to prevent these deaths, stop these deaths, but we're on the same wavelength here. But I'd heard about you. I'd heard in these circles where we all travel now, I'd heard about you. So I was so glad you agreed to do the podcast. And I want to start off by letting people know that you kind of have a famous character played by a famous actor based upon you and your life. Can you tell us about that?
That's funny. Yes, the Michael Keaton character in the Hulu series Dopesick is actually based on me from about episode 3 on, whenever he develops his own addiction, because I'm in recovery myself, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. But yeah, it's kind of weird to see it on TV, because I told them the stories, and I'm not a writer. They are great writers. And whenever we did it back in 2020, I didn't know who would be cast in that role. Didn't even have a clue how much of my material they would use. But basically, everything you see from the end of episode 3 until the end of episode 7 happened in my life. So yeah, it's kind of weird to see it on TV. He won an Emmy for it. And I tell people all the time, as my running joke is, that he was a hack before he got my role. And, I shot him to start him. Obviously, Batman wasn't anything. So.
He maybe should have given you that Emmy. Maybe you deserve it. Did you get to meet Michael Keaton?
I did have the opportunity, and it was at the premiere, and I actually couldn't go. Beth Macy, the writer, who wrote the book, had called me, and I was having surgery the next day that I had waited forever for, and I don't have surgery. So I couldn't go. And it was interesting because the next day I came into work, and I don't run any of our social media stuff. I write content, and we got a whole team of people that does that stuff. And so one of our social media folks came up to me and goes, "Hey, Doc, are you in trouble?" And I thought, well, it's possible. I mean, my past. I said, "No, I don't think so. Why?" And they said, "Well, your LinkedIn page got 2,000 hits last night or some crazy number." And
yeah.
I was trying to think, what happened? And so at the press conference afterward, Beth had told them.
Do you think they did an accurate job of portraying you and everything in that series?
Yeah, I thought it was phenomenally well done, even if I wasn't involved in it. The book itself follows a central character who's real. Her name is Tess. And I actually know Tess's sister and Tess's daughter. Tess wound up, like a lot do, lost her battle with addiction. And so the character on the Hulu series was not Tess, but it was rotated around a female character who wound up losing her battle as well. And the depiction of her and her addiction and her family's reaction to that addiction. She was a lesbian in rural West Virginia, so you can imagine what that was like. And she worked in the coal mine. And then, her parents' understanding of what was going on with her and the battles that took place in the house, they were so well done. And then, for my addiction, how they portrayed my own addiction, it was just perfect. I didn't have a single complaint about any of it. There's no Hollywood there. There wasn't anything that was over dramatized. I thought it was very, very well done. And the interaction with the pharmaceutical reps was accurate as well. I experienced that. That wasn't me, but I had the same experience. So I thought it was well done.
You would hope that series like Dopesick, Painkiller, The Pharmacist, we know Dan,
We do.
that they would make a difference or wake people up or at least educate people on the disease of addiction, how we got to this place in our society with the opioid issue.
You hope that, it's what I tell about Best Book. Best Book was a New York Times bestseller. The last time I looked, it sold, 500,750,000 copies. It's a lot, right? 20 million people saw Dopesick.
Wow. Yeah.
Right. And so you realize the scope of this thing, and it's still going. I mean, people still watch it now. It's very well done. And, as of the others, Painkiller. And I think that's based on Barry Mayer's book from back in the day. And then, of course, Dan's story with the pharmacist. And so I've had patients come to me whose parents were resistant to them seeing someone until they found out that I was the Dopesick doc. Right. And I don't care. I'll use it however we got to. Right.
Sure.
I don't give a
Yeah.
And so I think that it's built some roads there. And for me, when that came up was, we're going to use your stories if you will let us. And I was thinking, well, I planned on taking those to my grave, right? But I had this thought, what if you had a disease you never saw anybody get better? What would that be like to be out there and struggling with addiction? Does anybody ever get better? Because everybody wants to know the dirty underbelly. You know that, right? I want them to see this side of it. This side of me and you interacting and us running into each other in Washington and the other families who have taken this tragedy and come out on the other side and are doing positive things moving forward, and how we put together these lives that we have. And those pieces are still missing, right? We're never going to fix that. But how we are able to recover. And that's the message I always want to bring. And if they want to know the dirty underbelly, I'm fine with that too. But this is the message that we want out there.
Right. Well, let's start at the beginning for people that don't know your story. Loyd's battle with substances began in college. When he decided to drink, he had a tough time stopping until he passed out or ran out of alcohol. Despite his use, Loyd managed to still earn excellent grades and get into medical school.
In med school itself, I actually didn't use. I'd never been a successful drinker in my life. And the weird thing is I had no idea that my issue with not being a very good drinker would put me at risk to misuse these pain pills. I mean, no clue, because we aren't taught it in medical school and residency, believe it or not. But that's why I loved your idea so much with the books and the education you're doing. Those kids are probably better educated than the doctors in their community, which is a really strange thing, but I promise you it's true. And so when I got to med school and I met my classmates, they were the most impressive bunch of people I'd ever met in my life. And I didn't want them to see me drink because I was embarrassing. And so I didn't drink all the way through med school. They actually elected me their class president on the second or third day of med school, and I just couldn't embarrass them. And so I didn't. But at the very end of medical school, when everybody went their different directions, I was back drinking pretty quick after that. And then, not long after, found opioid pain medication. So I was towards the end of my residency when I picked up the first time.
And it was an opioid. And did you know much about opioids at that time? And I agree with what you say about physicians not getting the training when it comes to addiction at all, really.
Right. It's weird. I'll guarantee you this, more than 95% of the doctors in your community. I bet my life on that one. But, we really don't get training. We don't get training on the proper prescribing of controlled substances for both acute and chronic pain. And we get almost no training on the recognition of risk factors for and referral to treatment for people with any type of SUD, And so when I say SUD, I mean substance use disorder. We don't get training on that, and it's really embarrassing. So I didn't know very much about it. I knew opioid pain medication. I knew what we used them for in the clinical setting, but, I also knew that they were highly abused. I mean, this is like 2000, 2001. So Barry Mayer's book, Painkiller, hadn't come out yet, right? It was still down the road, but we already saw, I grew up in rural Appalachia. So in rural Appalachia, we were already seeing this, right? We would get news reports on the radio at night of these overdoses secondary to this drug called OxyContin. So I was aware of that, obviously, and then the promotion of the drug in my offices. But when I picked that thing up, did I realize that within a matter of months that I would have to have that over everything else in my life, including my wife, my children, my career? No, I didn't have any appreciation for that at all. I just thought it was weak-minded people.
Huh. And so the first time you took an opioid, what did it do for you? Was it something I ask this because I personally don't suffer from substance use disorder, but I have shared a stage with many people who have suffered from opioid use disorder who told me, like the first time or the second time they did something like this, they found their answer in life. I find that to be so interesting.
No question. That's what I was going to tell you. I came from a background of a lot of addiction in my family and of trauma. I'm a survivor of physical and sexual abuse. And I had no idea that those things put me at increased risk. And so the first time that I took that pain pill, it was a Vicodin, broke it in half. So it was 2.5 milligrams. It made me feel normal. It made me feel like I had found the answer to what I had been looking for to relieve this thing I had inside of me my whole life. And I was successful. I mean, I did pretty good, right? I mean, I did well in school and had an MD degree, and I'm getting ready to, step out into a career that I've trained for a long time. And really financially, I probably wasn't going to have to really worry a whole lot until, the day I lied, unless I somehow messed it up. But it felt like it completed me. And so I would agree with those people wholeheartedly. I know exactly what that feels like.
That feeling soon led to an addiction that would take over his life. Days after taking his first pill, Dr. Loyd stole a few of his aunt's prescription painkillers and then later began keeping the prescriptions his patients brought during a visit and writing them a new one.
Within 3 years, I was using 500 milligrams of oxys a day. And so if you think about that, I went from 1/2 of a Vicodin, 5 milligrams, to 500. So that's 100 pills a day. That accelerated pretty quick. I got there in about 2.5 years. And, I wasn't living underneath the bridge. I was seeing your friends and family and relatives in the hospital. I'm a hospitalist, internal medicine physician. So I'm working in the ICU, medical step-down units, taking care of patients every day.
Addiction among these high stress fields in the medical profession is really not unusual, whether people are turning to alcohol or pills, whether it's a doctor or a nurse. It's not unusual.
It's not. It's actually higher than the general population. So lifetime prevalence is about 18 to 20%, which is, you think about it, it's about 1 in 5. And point prevalence is around 2%. So just think about that in the community you live in. For every 100 medical providers out there, you have 2 of them are in active addiction right now. And so it's not, but it's this shame thing, right? We kind of talked a little bit about that in DC. I have access to basically anything that I need, yet I can't tell anybody I've got this problem or I'm going to lose everything I've worked my entire life for.
Right.
And so the denial potential there is really, really high because you want to protect this license that I worked really hard for and this board certification I worked really hard for. I don't want it taken away from me. And by the way, it's also how I provide a living for my family. So denial in these professional populations is really high because of what you stand to lose.
I think what people don't understand about addiction is that they don't understand when you have so much to lose, why you'd continue. I actually am friends with an eye doctor who started breaking into people's homes to steal their medicine. And she has since gotten her license. I mean, she's in recovery. She's gotten her license back. But boy, was it a shameful thing. And people don't always understand why, when you have so much to lose, do you continue to use?
Yes. It's what I didn't understand. I mean, you know what I do now, and this is my life. And if you told me I had to go back and work in the hospital and do what I used to, I'd quit because I really feel like this is why I'm here. I mean, I went through this right at the start of the opioid crisis. I have MD after my name. I think it positioned me to fulfill what I was put on this earth to do. I mean, I believe that with everything I have, and I'm not one of those dudes. I'm just telling you. And so what I didn't realize is that in addiction, you lose access to the frontal lobe of your brain, and your frontal lobe of your brain is about insight, judgment, and empathy. So if we take any of us and we get rid of our frontal lobes, basically did a lobotomy, right? Just cut all the connections between the frontal lobe and the rest of our brain, we'd be driven solely by our pleasure center. And I don't think any of us have a really hard time, if we're honest with ourselves, of figuring out where we would wind up if we were driven solely by pleasure, right? We'd all wind up in jail basically by noon. And so I didn't realize any of that. I didn't realize that the part of my brain that controlled my desire and my will to live, which is pretty strong, would be overcome or hijacked by this. I didn't get that, right, until I lived it. And then when I lived it, I got it wholeheartedly. I love my wife. I love my kids. But the truth is, in the throes of my addiction, I had to have this thing or I thought that I would die. And what would you do to get the thing you thought you would die without? And the answer to that's anything. So your friend who's the eye doctor breaking into houses, stealing medication, I get that. I'm not condoning it. I get it.
Yeah.
Right? If you look at Dopesick, Keaton taking his patients' pain medication and just writing them more. I did that. I mean, that's my story.
Here's Dr. Loyd's story in the Dopesick trailer.
I can't live like this anymore.
I'll start you on this. Call on a miracle drug. You only take 2 a day.
I think I can make this the biggest drug in the world.
You think maybe that medicine might be just a tad more addictive than you said?
That's not what we're hearing.
Something is happening here.
Would I do that today? Heck no, right? It's unethical. It's, stealing, right? There's a lot of things wrong with it. But in the moment, I felt like I had to have it or I was going to die.
And it was lucky that you were using in the time period, if you want to use the word luck, I'm sorry, but it was lucky it was during that time period and not now, because now the drug supply is so deadly.
I think about that all the time. I've done a lot of these. You're the first person to ever ask me this. I think about that a lot, because before my use got so high, I had access, right? I mean, all my buddies are doctors and they don't look at me that way. And so I had access, people's medicine cabinets, right? But when you get up to a certain amount, there's no choice but to go to the street. And, think about what I could have gotten a hold of then if it wasn't around. And
Right.
the things that were on the street were diverted pharmaceuticals. And so, I just didn't get a hold of it. I would have more than likely gotten a hold of it, right, if it had been now. So you're right. It's a timing thing for sure.
So what was your life like at that highest level of use, 3 years or so into your active addiction?
It's so funny, to think about, because when I hear people talk about their bottoms, mine wasn't that at all. And sometimes I have imposter syndrome about being in recovery because I haven't had it as tough as other people in recovery. No matter what, and there's a certain amount of forgiveness that comes along and see an MD after my name. It's almost like I'm really not one of them, right? Whatever them are. And basically I had about a 4-year run. I was teaching. I'm still an assistant professor of medicine, but back then I was teaching full time. And all 4 of those years, I was voted the most outstanding instructor in the students' internal medicine rotations. And, 6 weeks before I went to treatment back in 2004, I was at the graduation ceremony, and the students that honored me as being the mentor of the year for their entire med school, all 4 years. And I was using the whole time. And I actually used in their ceremony, I went to the bathroom and used 160 milligrams of OxyContin during the ceremony. And so people couldn't see it from the outside. There were some physical changes, but people thought it was just because I was overworked. And I did have some things that, looking back on it, people would have seen, but I didn't have any of those things. Nobody knew. I was living a big time secret life for sure.
That must have just eaten you up inside.
Terrible.
Yeah.
Sometimes I maybe minimize my own addiction because I didn't have those consequences. I didn't go to jail. I didn't get in trouble with the DEA, none of those things. But I did go to bed half the nights praying I wouldn't die because I knew how much I was taking every day, and the other half praying that I would because I'd finally be free. I know this is going to sound strange, but I really didn't know that there was anybody that could help me.
Yeah, I think most people feel that way when they're in active addiction or even with mental illness. People feel like there's no one that can help me.
I didn't feel like there was, and the things I'd seen in my life and people that I'd seen struggle with substances, all of them died. And part of my motivation for doing Dopesick, right? Hey, we can live. There's actually more people living in active recovery right now in the United States than there are in active addiction. Now that number's skewed a little bit because of the ones we've lost, but it's true. And I had no concept of that. It was hopeless.
What made you go to treatment?
My dad, my dad saw changes in me. I wasn't the son that he knew. And he actually chased it for a little over a year, trying to ask my nurses and see what was going on. And he got the blue wall, right? They weren't going to do anything. Even things they saw, they wouldn't tell him because they didn't want to feel like they were hurting my career or, hurting my name within the community. But I actually took my son down to meet my dad. My dad's a hiker, still is, in his 80s, and took my son down to meet him to go hike. And Heath was 9 at the time, and he was standing at my truck window. And I used to just carry my pills. I didn't give a crap who saw them. I didn't care. And so I had them in the cup holder of my truck, and it was bowled over. I mean, just hundreds of pills there. And I could have sworn I saw my dad walk away. I mean, in my mind's eye telling you the story right now, I can see it. And I reached over and I grabbed 15 10-milligram Percocets, so 150 milligrams of opioids, threw them in my mouth all at once. And then when I turned around, he was standing right there. I mean, right there. And he looked at me and he said, Steve, he said, did you just take a handful of those pills? Do you know what I told him? I said, no. Well, hell, he just saw me, right? I mean, just happened. And he shook his head and he said, all right, be careful. And the next day when I got home from work, I drove around the corner and my house was up on a hill and I saw his truck sitting in my driveway and I knew what he was there for. And so he put me in the truck and he said, we're going to go see your sister. And I hadn't seen her in 10 years. And by the way, she and I are great friends today and I love her very much. But we had struggled with my mom and dad's divorce. And I said, I don't want to go see her. And he said, well, we're going to see her. And we got up the interstate a little bit and he looked at me and he said, Steve, he said, do you have a drug problem? I said, no, Daddy, I don't. I said, I'm working really hard. I was trying to pay back med school loans. I was working 2 or 3 jobs and, working 100 hours a week. And he didn't say anything. And we drove probably another 5 minutes. And this time he was crying. And he put his hand over on my knee. And he said, Steve, he said, you have a drug problem. This wasn't a question. And this was a statement. And I started crying. And the weird thing is that I felt an ungodly sense of relief. I felt like somebody else knew. I had no idea what the future held, but now somebody else knew. And I said, yeah, Daddy. I said, I do. And I said, I don't see any way out. I said, I'm going to lose my medical license. I'm going to lose my wife, my kids. I'm going to lose my car, my house, everything I've worked my entire life for. He shook his head and he said, well, he said, none of that stuff is going to do you any good if you're dead. I didn't have a comeback for that one. I still don't. It's been 20 years. I don't have a comeback. And I said, okay. And we basically got over to my sister's. She had seen me at Walmart. I hadn't seen her. She had called Dad and said, Dad, I'm worried about Steve. He doesn't look like my brother. And they intervened on me. We got on the computer and Googled, doctors with addiction. And we figured out that there's programs. And I live in the great state of Tennessee. And one of the things we are progressive about is treatment for professionals. And we had one of the top programs in the country. And I got to take advantage of that. It changed my life.
Well, thank God you went. That's what I'm thinking about, because we were about to do an intervention with my daughter. We were 3 days away from our family holding an intervention when she died. And I was so scared to do that. I mean, your dad must have felt like I felt. I was afraid of her anger. I was afraid she would just walk out. What if you wouldn't have gone? What if you would have said no?
Well, I've talked to Dad about this, many times over the last 20 years, and he felt just like you did. He was really scared. He told me it's the hardest thing he ever did in his life. My dad's, born in 1941. He's done a few tough things in his life, the least of which is providing for a family with a high school education, which he did.
Thankfully, Dr. Loyd's father not only found the courage to speak up, but his intervention also came at a good time, when Dr. Loyd was finally ready to admit the truth about his substance use disorder.
I was so desperate. I was to the point where I just knew I was going to die. And I had no idea. I had no idea what treatment was. I didn't know what withdrawals were. I didn't know any of that. I just knew that I was going to die. And I knew that I wanted my kids to have a dad and my wife to have a husband. And I knew that. And so there was never any question. I was like, I'm crying. I'm devastated. And thank God somebody knows.
And what was your wife and children? What were their reactions to you going to treatment?
I had to call Karen, and she just didn't believe it. How can I be sleeping in the same bed with, right? And so really Karen, even to this day, will drop her head with this because she thinks she should have saw it. And really, she's going to be the last one to see it. And the reason I say that is that I'm her husband, I'm the father of her children, I'm the provider for our family. I've got to be okay. If I'm not okay, our family's okay. So by God, I'm okay. Right. And that's the mindset of, of Karen, even though she wasn't conscious of it. So she didn't do anything wrong. It's not her fault. This is me. I picked up, I have the disease of addiction. She was just couldn't believe she didn't know. And she really didn't believe it at first. The kids were young enough. Heath was 9. He was scared. He didn't know where his dad was going. My little girl, Haley, was 6 and she doesn't even remember it.
Yeah.
And so, I guess for them, it was just fear. What am I going to get back? Is he going to come back? Is he still going to be a doctor? Is he going to be dad? All those things. Interesting thing, Heath, who's now 30, confronted me when he was about, I don't know, 20, 21. He and I were alone and he said, "Hey, Dad, I got something I want to talk to you about." And he confronted me about leaving for treatment. He said, "I was 9. He said, "I was scared." He said, "You're my best friend. I was his little league coach." He said, "I was scared." I was like, all right. So, we worked through that and he knows the dad he has now. And he actually works in this field, believe it or not. But I guess it's kind of understandable because his life was changed so much by it. But yeah, it was a weird thing for my family. And Karen, when we were watching Dopesick together, because I've done this a bunch, right? I mean, I've talked about my story. I've, met awesome people like you and shared things with you and you shared things back. So we've done this for a while. And I'm not saying it gets easy, but it's not what it was 20 years ago.
Sure.
So we're laying there watching Dopesick in bed at night, and I can just see the look in Karen's eyes sometimes. Like, wow, I didn't know that, or I didn't know that you were that desperate, or I didn't know that, one of the scenes in there is the Keaton character buying drugs from a patient. And that really happened. And, I didn't know that, and I didn't know that's how you learn that. And it's been interesting going through the years because even now, 20 years later, things will pop up every now and then that I can see the look on her face and still see the hurt.
Yeah, sure. I understand Karen because as Emily's mom, I didn't know she was using heroin. And I feel like I should have known earlier how bad it was. Do you know what I mean? Like I should have known sooner. And so as a loved one, you do feel like, how did you miss something? How did you not know something of this magnitude? But I also do know now, logically, that people suffering from substance use disorder are very good at hiding things, are very good at denial and all of those things. So I get that part of it, but still a part of me always thinks, I wish I would have acted sooner. I wish I would have known sooner. I wish I would have seen all these obvious signs. But when you're that close to someone, you don't always see it. And they don't want you to see it.
I didn't want anybody to see it. I never knew Emily. I have a ton in common with Emily, a lot. And those are where my mind goes. You're her mom. What's mom going to think of me if she sees this?
Yeah,
right. And how
right.
desperate would you be to prevent that? And very desperate, right?
Right.
I mean, you do anything to not let that happen. I'm going to be a disappointment. I get it, right? I mean, the denial is there. It is so high and we just can't see it, right? I mean, I couldn't see it because looking back on it, what do I think Karen would have done if I'd have went home one day and said, "Hey, honey, I'm struggling"? She would have helped me.
Yeah.
Right. She
Right.
would have. I just couldn't get there. I didn't want her to see me that way.
Yeah, I understand that. When Dr. Loyd decided to enter treatment in 2004, he received a lot of support from his family. But sadly, the same cannot be said for many other people who were at the facility.
Even when I was in detox, keep in mind, I didn't know what detox was. There were 24 kids on my floor, and none of them knew I was a doctor. And they were all young. I mean, I was in my early 30s. They were all 19, 20, 22 years old. And I assumed that we were all there as part of a program. I was at Vanderbilt in Nashville, and I assumed that we would all go from detox to treatment facilities that were going to help us. Do you know how many of those 24 got to leave that detox facility and go to a treatment program? How many would you guess?
Half? One?
It was me. I was the only one that got to, and this is even before I got any treatment, even while I was in the throes of horrible, dope sickness, I started to see this. It's weird, but it's true. I realized that there's 2 different treatment systems out there. There's a treatment system that if you've got the means or you've got a license that you get, and then there's the treatment system that everybody else gets. And I started to see that right then. And the little girl that was in the room next to me, I'll never forget her. I've told her story a million times. I don't know where she is today. I think about her every week. She never gets off my mind for longer than that. But the day before I left, the day before I got out to go to my treatment center, she came up to me and she was a prostitute. She had abscesses up and down her arm from injection use. She had HIV disease and hepatitis C. And she had a picture in her hand. She said, "Hey, Steve," she said, "I want you to see me when I was clean." Her words, not mine. And the picture she showed me was her junior year at Mount Juliet High School, just outside of Nashville, at her junior prom. She looked like Emily, right? Beautiful. I mean, stunning. And I think about her because she wanted me to see her in a way other than how she thought I saw her. Those kids, I would hear them talking at night. They had no idea I was a doctor. And I would hear them talking at night when they were supposed to get out the next day. And they were trying to figure out what kind of symptom they could come up with where they could stay one more day.
Because they knew if they got out, they would use
They
again.
did. They
Yeah.
did. That has never been off my mind for longer than a few days in a row because it's what motivates me. I cost too much money to make. I'm a doctor. Taxpayers of the state of Tennessee paid for my education, and I was expensive. So instead of recreating me, it's better to rehabilitate me and put me back in my job. And that's what I got. I got world-class treatment. We kill kids. We kill them all the time. We send them to detox for 5 days and then turn them loose, which is we might as well sign their death certificate. Or we send them to a 28-day treatment program, expect them to come back normal in 28 days, which is a fairy tale.
Right.
And we don't tell families the truth. We don't give them the resources that they need in order to support their loved one. You know, when they do get home, they don't stay in treatment long enough. And basically we turn them out to die because we can't.
Right. The whole system is broken and failing people every single day. You're right. And I encounter this as much as we try to help people. And we help people at a 28-day treatment center, because the insurance company dictated the 28 days, right? And we aren't able to help people who don't have insurance because that's a state issue. And so we don't run treatment centers. We offer treatment scholarships. But it frustrates me every day that I can't help everybody. And I don't know how to get these systems to change. And I'm sure you feel the same way. So what do we need to do? I mean, I want to be hopeful. Emily's hope. I want to hope that we can change as a society, that we can value every human being because every human being is valuable, which is why I do the work that I do. But it's not reflected like you were just talking about. It isn't reflected in how we treat people and the access we give people to health care.
It's not. It's not equal. There's another way out of the opioid crisis, and we won't ever say it, but there is. We can kill our way out of it, right? We can let enough people die that eventually, it gets better. And sometimes I'm afraid that's the approach that I see. And I told you about the physical and sexual abuse. I didn't come clean with the sexual abuse when I initially got into recovery. But I'd been in recovery double-digit years, and my life was straight up. I mean, I couldn't have dreamed it, right? And I'd never dealt with the sexual abuse, and I started having PTSD symptoms and not using. I didn't relapse. And I wound up on the edge of my bed with a loaded .45 pointed at my right temple. And the hammerback, I was going to take my own life. And I thought about two things in that moment. I thought about, one, who's going to find me? I don't know why that was important, but it seemed to be. And the other one is I remembered to ask for help. And I didn't know anybody could help me, but I'd been in recovery long enough that I knew some folks. And it turned out that there was a place not far from me in Nashville that specialized in that kind of trauma. And I went there. And as much as drug and alcohol treatment changed my life, this changed my life even more because I was able to start to deal with the sexual abuse. I almost hate knowing it exists. Now, why would you think I would hate knowing it exists? Because the girls and people that I work with don't have any chance of ever getting that level of treatment. They don't.
Right.
It was $40,000 for 4 weeks, and now I think it's more cash. Might as well be $40 million.
Right.
My patients don't have access to that. My patients don't have access to the things that made such a big difference in my life. So the reason I was in DC and the reason I met you, that I'm going to keep pointing out the disparities in the system, and I'm going to keep making people tell me that it's okay to let people die because that's what they're saying. I think that everybody deserves a level of treatment that I got, and we have to figure out the way to do it.
One thing I do have to say, though, is that the patients you work with have you. Thank God they have you because you have experienced all of that top-notch treatment for both addiction and mental health and recovering from that kind of trauma. Do you think almost all addictions are rooted in? I think about this a lot with my daughter because I'm like, what happened? Did I miss something somewhere? What happened? Or does it just happen to some people? Or because I feel like she had sort of, other than a divorce of her parents, had sort of a storybook childhood, right?
So getting into this with Emily, pure conjecture, right? And I'm always hesitant to talk about that because I know how much you love her, right? I get that because I have a daughter. We don't know what goes on in our kids' lives. I mean, we think we do, right? They live in our house and we think we have control, and you know that's an illusion. We don't.
Yeah, right.
We don't have control, and we like to kid ourselves and think we do, and our own codependency will tell us we do sometimes, but we don't. And so when I see pictures of, young people like Emily, usually there's a story there. There's a trauma story there. There's a genetic story there. So when I teach addiction, I teach it as genetics, trauma, and opportunity, right? Slot machine, 3 sevens come down on the pay line. That's when the money comes out the bottom. And people can see that in their mind's eye and they get it. So a lot of times the root of it will be that trauma. You and your husband got a divorce. And how old was Emily when you got a divorce?
Right.
Right. And so that is a trauma for a child because you can talk about God and Jesus or whatever religion you are all the time. The truth is for kids, who's God? Mom and dad. Skin gods, right? And then that world gets disrupted. And I'm not casting blame on you or your ex.
Sure.
It's reality, right?
Right.
And my a divorce too. So there are parents out there that stay married for their kids that should have gotten a divorce a long time ago. And we know that as well.
I know that
right?
too.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm not throwing shade here. I'm just
Right.
saying that, and particularly, my abuser was in my own family. I didn't tell anybody that, right? And I've got pictures of us at Christmas, right? Abuser's right next to me. And so we don't know. And so when I think about young people like Emily and I see what the story was, I always wonder, what is the story? What happened?
Right. And also sensitivity. I think personality also has a lot to do with it. There's millions of kids whose parents get divorced and they don't wind up addicted to something, right? So it's just such a complicated thing, I think. But I do believe, like, my ASIC score is super high and I don't struggle from addiction. So why is that? And so I try to piece a lot of things together. And I know I won't ever know all the answers.
I do this all the time. It drives me nuts.
Yeah.
So I was just at a wonderful place last week, a National Federation of Families. And we talked about this. It was basically the title of my talk. And I am not my ACEs score.
Yeah.
My ACEs score is me. I mean, that I have that score. Those are the traumatic things that happened in my life. But I'm looking at you somewhere along the line. If you go back to when you were a little girl and you're coming through school and, you're proceeding throughout your life, you had people in your life that made a difference. You had people that gave you resiliency in some form or another, somewhere along the line. We all have protective factors. So what is that balance of protective factors that protects people who are genetically and traumatically predisposed? I don't know what they are. Why do some people develop it and some don't? Usually it comes back to those resiliency things, those protective factors that they had along the way. And I had protective factors as well. And so, where's that line there? And I think that's the kind of stuff that we can make ourselves crazy with. But I think if you go back in your own life and you look at your traumas, which you've obviously done, and then you look at the protective factors, who was that person you had in your life that made you realize at some point you were capable of stuff, right? We all have that person somewhere. Hopefully we do. And I think a lot of times with some of the young ladies that I deal with, they didn't have that person, or their protector was their abuser, or they never had any guidance from day one and their boundaries were broken through without them having any say in it whatsoever. And I see that a lot. So a lot of times when I see it, it's not only the trauma, it's the lack of those protective factors they had along the way.
I have a grief specialist on this podcast from time to time, and he believes that a lot of addictions are rooted in grief.
Good point. For me, it was always hard to separate grief from trauma, right?
Right. It could be the grief of the loss of your innocence.
No doubt. Well, I was thinking I mean, your trauma score is what it is, but now your trauma score would be even higher
Off the
because,
charts, right?
right, right.
I get up every day and I just go through life, I don't know.
But I look and see what have you done with that? And I look and see what you're doing right now. So you've got this education series that you're getting in K through 5 with. You carry this big, huge picture of Emily around in a damn tropical storm. So you get to use her story to help others. You have this podcast that you're trying to reach hurting families out there. These are all protective. You didn't dive into a bottle of wine or go down the prescription route. You channeled this. These are resiliency things about you that somehow you built along the way. I don't know how you do that, right? I mean, if we did, we'd go out and do that for everybody. But I think there are protective things, and you're channeling this in a way to try to use Emily's story to help other families out there not have to suffer what your family suffered.
Right. And when I just spoke to a group of families at the DEA Family Summit as a regional thing in the Midwest here, I said to everybody in that room, we're all here for the same reason because all of them had started something, right? And I said, we're all here for the same reason because we don't want to see anyone else go through this horrible pain that we've been through, right? So I don't know why some people respond in that way and other people do turn. I have known people who have completed suicide or drank themselves to death or even taken fentanyl to die, which just seems shocking after their child died in that way. But I do know those stories and why some people go down that route and others don't. I guess we won't answer that in this podcast, but
Well, we can answer the lack of value placed on lives by
Right.
people in corporate positions. These are somebody's kids. And I don't know if we get some of the other work that I do and some of the things that I've seen, it's even more damning than what's public because when these companies settle the lawsuits, one, they never admit guilt, and two, the evidence is sealed. So some of the sealed evidence I've gotten to work with, and I can tell you that we actually had to stop meetings around our litigation because I couldn't handle anymore. Because when you're talking about these people, when you're changing the words to the theme song, the Beverly Hillbillies to the Beverly Pillbillies, and you're the dude who's in charge of diversion and compliance for a major pharmaceutical distributor, and these are the people you've got looking over, and this is what they think of the people who are dying. I mean, hell, that's me.
well, and the only way that you can be okay with killing people is to devalue human life, right? I mean, that's the only way you can live with yourself and justify it is to think that that is the other.
You look at them as less than or expendable. I mean, you're going to call somebody a pillbilly? I mean, really, that's somebody's son, daughter, mom, dad. I mean, what if this was your kid? That's the thing I never could understand. And how come none of these people were ever called to the mat for it? The guy I just told you about still holds a major corporate position in the pharmaceutical industry. To me, he deserves to be in jail, or better yet, bring him where I am and I'll whip his ass and we won't have to worry about any of that. Right? But the thing is, and what you and I are talking about here today, and what we did in DC, even though the weather was terrible, we weren't large in number because of the tropical storm, but it's about community and relationship. That's what we're talking about here. What can we do? It's about community and relationship. That's what it's about. I don't know how you'll feel after you and I are done here in a little bit. I know how I'm going to feel. I'm going to feel better. I'll walk out of this room that I'm in, and just from talking to you today, I'll feel better. We talked about Emily. We talked a little bit about my story. We talked about reaching people with addiction. You and I have formed a relationship here today that's meaningful and more than just scratching the surface of stuff, right? How you doing? Fine. That kind of crap. And that's what I'm talking about. And the more that we can build this community and we can start to share in each other's hurts as well as our successes, then, the more successful we're going to be in helping people long term.
Right. And I always say it's always going to take all of us joining hands together. I can't do it by myself. I can do my work in my little corner of the world, but it's going to take all of us. Dr. Loyd is currently using his personal experiences to help others battling substance use disorder. He is the chief medical officer at Cedar Recovery, where they combine medication-assisted treatment with behavioral therapy and individual treatment plans.
Oh, I work with all kinds. My favorite patient is the pregnant patient. It just is. And I don't get to see as many of them as I used to because more people do it now, but they motivate me beyond belief. They're strong, resilient, some of the best people I've ever met in my life. But I basically kind of switched from concentrating on pregnant patients to concentrating on people who are incarcerated. And it's so much fun. and I do it every day. Matter of fact, where I am right now is actually our retreat where we're making our plans for the coming year. And I'm 56. I figure if I stay healthy, and I'm pretty healthy right now, I've got 15 years of working life, and I want to spend 15 years working in criminal justice. I want to reach the patient that's incarcerated in either a county, a federal, a state lockup, and try to help them find the path to recovery that's right for them. And that's, why I'm here.
Well, thank you for that, because as a journalist, I followed a woman through her prison sentence. She actually became addicted to opioids after gastric bypass surgery, which people don't always know, that people with gastric bypass surgery,
Huge risk.
huge risk, right? She didn't know, and ended up overdosing in a car, being saved by Narcan, and immediately sent to prison where no help whatsoever. Our prisons do a horrible, like 95% of the people in prison have SUD, and we're not treating that. And there's drugs in prison, as we all know. And I just think that it's just so awful. It's a part of that whole system problem that we talked about earlier. It's all part of it. I'm glad you're doing that work, because not enough people are.
It's fun. It's the right thing to do. And here's the other thing about it, and you know this as well. I'm not sure you're conscious of it, but when you do stuff like this, it helps you.
Oh, sure. I always say helping others is the most selfish thing I can do. It helps me most.
No doubt.
And helps me with my grief,
I think that it's why I still enjoy my pregnant patients so much, because it helps me. It really does. And then I get to give to them, and it helps them too. But the longer I do this, I see the injustices in the system. And I'm not about calling people out. I don't care about that. What I want to do is I want to help build a system that you get the help that's right for you, no matter where you touch it, because you and I both know that's not the case right now.
Right. We can sit here and we can complain about the system, but yeah, we have to somehow figure out ways to infiltrate it and change it. And I don't
Right.
know. I don't have all the answers. I wish I did, but I did just do a video with a woman who was addicted to heroin, and she found out she was pregnant, and she got an OBGYN who also was an addiction doctor, which was like a miracle.
That's
Right.
right. They're out there.
And was prescribed Suboxone, and she's still on Suboxone to this day. It's been about 5 years, but it saved her life. The baby and the medication saved her life.
Yeah. I love hearing stories like that. And, if people could get inside my phone and look at my pictures, I think they would smile ear to ear, because first pregnant mom I ever helped, her child was actually adopted. I didn't know the first thing about adoption, and she wanted to do that. So I learned about it with her, right? We helped her. And so the family who wound up adopting the child knows me. And this is all known. There's nothing clandestine. And, the kid's getting ready to turn 15 and get his driver's permit. And he's grown up in a family that's been loving and supportive. His actual birth mom is actually still doing well as well. But, I get pictures from grandmoms at milestones. Hey, there's such and such's 5th birthday or 6th birthday. Thank you. Right. I get those all the time. I never take them for granted, by the way, never.
So, in addition to having more equanimity among people for services, for treatment, is there anything else you think is the key to really helping people recover from substance use disorder?
People always ask me this, what do you need? Well, money, right? Resources. I'm going to give you something that doesn't cost any money, and you don't need any resources for it. And it'll make the biggest difference of all. And that's to change our mindset whenever we're trying to help somebody with this disease. When we bring that judgmental approach, you brought it on yourself. This is your fault. 3 strikes and you're out. This is your last chance. Or do we come into it? We're going to love you unconditionally. We're going to forgive you habitually. We're going to demonstrate mercy, and we're going to be here no matter how many times it takes.
I love that. I love that. Oh, you've written that down, right? I'm going to write it down after we go.
We founded our practices based on it. The hardest thing I have to do is hire providers, medical providers that can do those things. I don't care if you're from Harvard, Yale, you came out of the Ivy League, you went to Hopkins for residency. I don't give a crap. Can you demonstrate mercy? Can you forgive habitually? And can you love people unconditionally? If you can do those 3 things, we can work together. If you can't, then you can't work here. And I've hired providers that tell me they can do those. And then when I start looking at seeing how they're treating our patients, it's not that. And I go to them and I say, hey, this is not what we talked about. It says, well, Doc, Steve, I have a 3 strikes and you're out policy. And I love that one, because I have a 1 strike and you're out policy for people that have a 3 strike and you're out policy, because it doesn't do any good. You know this. If you had known about Emily and you had chosen the traditional route of laying down, this is your last chance, this and that, 3 strikes, right? None of that would have worked. You know it, and I know it.
Well, I did it. I did it. I
Right.
did the tough love. I did all that while she was still in high school. And at some point, I realized none of that worked. It just drove her away from me. And I started always thinking to myself, I have to approach her from a standpoint of love. And how would I want someone to treat me if it was me and I was doing this very same thing? And that transformed everything. So I can say that the last words to my daughter were, I love you. And she said it back. The last text to my daughter were, I love you. And she said it back. Thank God. But I was listening to other people's advice when I always say the trouble started with my daughter, the rebellion and the early use. I always say I was taking all this advice. You have to be tough. It was so hard. You have to play bad cop. You got to punish. I called the cops when she was still a juvenile. I did everything that I could think of to try to scare her or change her. And none of it worked. None of it. None of it doesn't work. Maybe it works for some people. Maybe somebody can get scared and think, oh, I'm going to stop doing this now. But it didn't work in her case, and it doesn't work in most people's cases. Our prisons and our jails would not be full.
I tell people that all the time because, say, well, it helped me. Well, it may have helped you, but you're an N of one.
Yeah.
I'm talking over a large scale.
Yeah.
And first of all, you did the best you could under the circumstances. And I have to work with families like this all the time because they'll start to blame themselves. That's not why I said that. I said that because it took me a while to see this. Addiction's the only disease I can think of that when you're unsuccessful in your treatment, it's your fault. We don't do that for heart failure or diabetes. Most people that fail at heart failure treatment are eating too much country ham, and most people that fail at diabetes treatment are drinking Mountain Dew Code Reds. But we don't ever mention any of that, right? We look at addiction as a moral failure. And so when you ask me, what can we do? This is the biggest thing we can do.
I agree.
And I'm not talking about shoveling somebody money or doing anything like that. I'm talking about letting them know that I'm here no matter what, and I don't run, and I'm going to help you until you're dead. And that's a fact. The retreat we're at right now, we built our whole practice on that. Tell me how sad it is that you can build a practice around treating people kindly and showing them love, and it's unusual. How sad is that?
Touche. Yeah, that is, yeah.
It's a matter of meeting people where they are no matter what. Now, there are consequences. You and I both know that.
Right. And that you can set boundaries and not have people take advantage of you.
Right.
You don't have to contribute to their use. That's not what you're talking about.
I'm talking about being here like you and I are. And I can tell you right now, if you ever develop a problem, you holler at me because I will damn sure help you no matter what.
I'm going to do that for sure.
Right.
If I ever need you, I'm going to call.
I get patients, that go back out, and I get them back, and they come in the office, and it's always the same story. They're hanging their head. Oh, Dr. Loyd, you're going to be so disappointed in me. And they look up, and I'm smiling ear to ear. What are you smiling for? I said, you're not dead, and I got you back.
Oh.
Right. And a lot of times, I'm going to say this because it needs to be said. I see the most harsh judgment coming out of people in the faith community. Okay. I see it repeatedly. And I'm a Christian and I go to church, right? I don't go to the church that shames the hell out of me. So when I look at something like that, that's a prodigal son story, right? I mean, Jesus dealt with this. And I get somebody back. I'm so glad they're not dead. And now we got another chance. And they always look at me like, I tell them that from the time they come in, but they don't believe me until they see it because it's not how they've been treated in the past.
Right.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. This is what we can change. The listeners of this podcast, if you listen to this, what can I do differently? This is it. Do this. And the side effect of it is you're going to like yourself better.
I think that is a wonderful note to end this podcast on. Let's do that. Let's all try to do that. Thank you for everything that you're doing. It's such important work. And I'm so glad that I ran into you in the tropical storm in DC.
I'm always glad when I stop somebody and talk to them. And I've never regretted it.
You never know where it's going to lead.
I had no idea. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for taking the time out of your day to learn more about one of the biggest crises facing our nation, the opioid epidemic. If you found this episode helpful, please leave us a positive review and share it with your friends and family. Stay tuned for a special episode later this month featuring a unique perspective from none other than music legend Prince's cousin.
My aunts and my relatives, they all encouraged Prince and I to play together, so we started playing local talent shows at that young age and was winning them against adults.
But now, Prince's cousin, Chaz Smith, is on a different mission that goes beyond music. He's trying to uncover the truth behind the fentanyl death of his world-renowned family member. Hear what he thinks needs to happen and why justice should be served. That's later this month on Grieving Out Loud. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, wishing you faith, hope, and courage. This podcast is produced by Casey Wonnenberg King and Anna Fye.